What happens when spreading cruel lies about your spouse for entertainment becomes evidence in court? How did my private jokes about his size and family turn into a public lawsuit with real damages? I'm Amaris Vance, and I never thought my little jokes would end up as evidence in a lawsuit. I was 32, worked in marketing, and had what everyone called a perfect life. My husband Melvin was 34, worked in IT, and honestly, he bored me to death. That Tuesday morning in the gym locker room was when I started the rumours that would destroy everything. I was tying my shoes after spin class when Claire walked over to my bench. She had that look on her face, the one that meant she wanted gossip. She sat down next to me and asked how things were at home. I knew she was fishing for something juicy. The other women were getting dressed nearby, pretending not to listen but obviously paying attention. I decided to give them what they wanted. I sighed dramatically and said Melvin was sweet but disappointing where it mattered. Claire leaned in closer and asked what I meant. I looked around like I was checking who might hear, then held up my pinky finger and wiggled it. The message was clear. Two women at the lockers behind us started giggling. Claire covered her mouth in fake shock, but her eyes were delighted. I added that some men just weren't blessed in that department and it wasn't his fault. The lie felt easy, almost natural. Claire asked how I dealt with it. I shrugged and said I had learned to lower my expectations. I mentioned that he usually finished in under 2 minutes anyway, so the size issue barely mattered. This was completely untrue, but the women were eating it up. One of them said her first husband had been the same way. Another said that's why they made toys. Everyone laughed. I felt powerful, like I was the star of the best show they had seen all week. The truth was that Kieran, my personal trainer, was waiting for me in the parking lot. We had been meeting for 3 months. After every training session, we would sit in his car for 20 minutes, sometimes longer. He was everything Melvin wasn't. Exciting, muscular, dangerous. He made me feel young again. But I couldn't tell the women about Kieran, not yet. So I gave them Melvin instead, served him up like appetizer before the main course. When I got home, Melvin was already making dinner. Emma was at the table doing homework. He looked up when I walked in and checked his watch. He asked why I was 40 minutes late if the gym closed at 7. I said the parking lot was packed and I stayed to stretch. He mentioned driving past earlier and seeing plenty of spaces. His voice was calm, but I could hear the question underneath. I turned it around on him immediately. I asked if he was tracking my movements now. I said this was exactly the kind of controlling behavior that pushed women away. Emma looked up from her math worksheet, sensing the tension. Melvin just turned back to the stove and said dinner would be ready in 10 minutes. I noticed his phone on the counter had a calendar notification showing. It said, Civic Center 3:30 p.m. for next Wednesday. He quickly dismissed it when he saw me looking. During dinner, Emma talked about her school play. She needed a costume for her role as a flower. Melvin said he would help her make it this weekend. He was always good with things like that, patient and creative with our daughter. It was one of the things that had attracted me to him originally. But now it just felt boring, predictable. Kieran would never spend a Saturday afternoon making paper petals. That's what made him exciting. After Emma went to bed, Melvin tried to be intimate. We were lying in our bed and he reached for me, his hand on my hip. I pulled away and said I was sore from working out. He asked if everything was okay between us. I said he was being needy and I was just tired. The truth was that Kieran had already satisfied me in his car, but Melvin didn't need to know that. He rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling for a long time. I pretended to fall asleep, but I could feel him thinking beside me. After about an hour, his phone vibrated on the nightstand. The screen showed an unknown number. He picked it up carefully, trying not to wake me, though I was watching through barely open eyes. He took the phone to the bathroom and closed the door. I could hear his voice, low and serious, but couldn't make out the words. He was in there for 15 minutes. When he came back, he didn't return to bed right away. He stood by the window looking out at the street. The streetlight showed his face and he looked tired, older than his years. He glanced at me in the bed, then walked over to his dresser. He moved some things around quietly, organizing or looking for something. Then he finally got back into bed, but he stayed on his side, as far from me as possible. The next morning he was already gone when I woke up. He had left a note saying he had an early meeting. Emma was eating cereal at the table. She asked why Daddy left so early. I said he had important work stuff. She asked if we were fighting. Kids always know more than you think they do. I told her everything was fine and rushed her to get ready for school. At work, I checked my phone and saw Claire had already texted our group chat. She said she had the best gossip but could only share in person. I knew she was talking about what I had said in the locker room. By lunch, 3 other women from the gym had texted me privately. They wanted to know more details. They said they always suspected something was off with Melvin. I gave them each a slightly different story, adding new embarrassing details with every telling. The thing about Melvin was that he really wasn't a bad husband. He was actually pretty good in bed, attentive and caring. He made good money, never forgot anniversaries, helped with housework. His family was working class but perfectly nice people. His dad was a mechanic and his mum was a retired teacher. They lived in a small house, but it was clean and full of love. But none of that made for good gossip. So I created a version of Melvin that did. By the time I picked up Emma from school, I had told 6 different people that my marriage was basically a charity case. I said I stayed with Melvin because leaving would destroy him. I painted myself as a martyr, stuck with a man who couldn't satisfy me in any way. Each time I told the story, it got easier. Each time I added another humiliating detail about him or his family. The lies were becoming more real to me than the truth. That night, Melvin asked if I wanted to watch a movie together after Emma went to bed. I said I had work to catch up on. He nodded and went to the guest room with his laptop. I heard him on another phone call, speaking quietly. Something about the way he was acting made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling away. Melvin was too passive to ever do anything about anything. That's what I told myself as I texted Kieran about meeting tomorrow. Melvin would never fight back. The coffee shop near the gym was packed with the morning rush when I met Claire and her friends. She had brought 3 women I barely knew, all eager to hear more details about my marriage. We grabbed a corner table and they leaned in like conspirators planning something illegal. I loved being the center of attention, the one with the most interesting story to tell. Claire started by saying she had told them a little bit about my situation. The women nodded sympathetically, like I was dealing with a terminal illness. I stirred my latte and sighed heavily for effect. One woman, whose name I think was Janet, asked how long things had been bad. I said it had been getting worse for years, that Melvin just couldn't meet my needs as a woman. They all made understanding noises. I told them about his family next. I said his parents' house was so small that everyone could hear everything through the walls. I described how his father still had permanent grease under his fingernails from working on cars. I mentioned that his mother bought all her clothes from discount stores and thought Olive Garden was fancy dining. The women laughed, but it was uncomfortable laughter, like they weren't sure if they should. I pushed harder, saying I had basically rescued Melvin from that life. Janet asked why I married him in the first place. I said I was young and stupid, that I had confused pity with love. I told them he had pursued me desperately in college, almost stalking me until I gave in. This was completely false because I had actually pursued him, drawn to his quiet confidence and stability. But that truth didn't fit the narrative I was building. I needed them to see me as a victim who deserved better. Claire pulled out her phone and showed me her latest Instagram post. It was a quote about settling for less in relationships with several crying, laughing emojis. The comments were already filling up with inside jokes about tiny problems and quick finishes. I liked the post and added my own comment with just a microscope emoji. The other women giggled and said we were terrible, but they all pulled out their phones to follow the conversation. I got to my office an hour later, and the story had already spread there too. My co-worker Sarah stopped by my desk with coffee and that concerned look people get when they want gossip but need to seem caring. She asked if everything was okay at home because Claire had mentioned I was going through something. I let my eyes get a little watery and said, Melvin and I were having problems, but I didn't want to talk about it at work. This guaranteed everyone would talk about it. By lunch, I had 3 more co-workers stop by with sympathy and questions. I gave each one a different piece of the story. I told Sarah that Melvin had performance issues. I told Brad from accounting that Melvin was threatened by my success. I told the receptionist that his family was causing problems because they were jealous of our lifestyle. Each lie built on the others, creating a version of Melvin that was pathetic and embarrassing. That evening was my office holiday party at a downtown restaurant. Melvin arrived straight from work, looking tired but making an effort. He had worn the blue tie I bought him last Christmas. When we walked in together, I could feel the shift in the room. People who had been laughing suddenly got quiet. Women gave me pitying looks. Men smirked at Melvin like they knew something he didn't. The rumours had clearly made the rounds. We got drinks and tried to mingle, but it was awkward. Every conversation felt loaded with subtext. When Melvin went to the bathroom, Sarah pulled me aside and whispered that I was so strong for bringing him. She said most women wouldn't have the patience I had. I played the martyr, saying marriage was about commitment even when things were difficult. She squeezed my hand and said I deserved so much better. Derek Chen from Melvin's IT department was also at the party. I saw him pull Melvin aside near the elevators. They talked quietly for several minutes, Derek showing something on his phone. Melvin's face changed as he looked at the screen. His jaw tightened and his shoulders went rigid. But he didn't say anything, just nodded and put his hands in his pockets. Derek patted his shoulder like he was offering condolences. On the drive home, Melvin was silent. I asked if he had fun at the party. He said people were acting strange around him. He asked if I had said anything to anyone about our personal life. I laughed and told him he was being paranoid, that not everything was about him. I said maybe people were just picking up on his negative energy. He gripped the steering wheel tighter but didn't respond. When we got home, Emma was asleep at the babysitter's house next door. Melvin went to pick her up while I changed clothes. I checked my phone and found dozens of notifications. Claire's Instagram story showed her at a club with Kieran. They were in a group but standing close together. Someone had tagged me in the comments asking if I was coming out later. I quickly deleted the tag before Melvin could see it. Melvin came back with Emma asleep in his arms. He carried her to her room so gently, tucking her in and kissing her forehead. For a moment, watching him be such a good father, I felt guilty about everything. But then I remembered how boring our life had become, how Kieran made me feel alive. Melvin was a good father, but that didn't mean I had to suffer in silence. He went to the guest room without saying goodnight. Through the door, I could hear him on the phone again. His voice was low and serious, very different from his usual tone. He was taking notes. I could hear the pen scratching on paper. The call lasted almost an hour. When he finally ended it, I heard him typing on his laptop for another hour after that. The next morning, I woke up to find Melvin already in the kitchen. He had made coffee but set out 2 mugs on opposite sides of the counter, not together like usual. He was reading something on his tablet, making notes in a small notebook. When I asked what he was working on, he said it was just organizing some things. His calendar was open next to him with several appointments marked "Meeting Personal" over the next 2 weeks. Emma came down for breakfast and asked why Daddy was sleeping in the guest room so much. Melvin told her he had been snoring and didn't want to keep Mommy awake. She seemed to accept this but kept looking between us. Kids always sense when something is wrong. Melvin dropped her at school while I left early for the gym, where Kieran was waiting. After my workout and time with Kieran, I checked social media again. The conversation about my marriage had spread beyond Claire's posts. People I barely knew were commenting with sympathy and advice. Someone had screenshotted Claire's original post and shared it in a larger group chat. My phone kept buzzing with new messages asking if I was okay, if I needed anything, if Melvin knew about my unhappiness. I loved the attention, but something felt different. When I got to work, people weren't just gossiping anymore. They were looking at me with real pity, like my life was actually falling apart. Sarah brought me tissues even though I wasn't crying. Brad offered to help if I needed any financial advice for potential changes. Even my manager asked if I needed any personal time to deal with home issues. That evening, Melvin came home with a folder labelled Household that he put in the desk drawer and locked. He had another reminder on his phone for downtown 10:45 a.m. tomorrow. When I asked about it, he said it was just an errand he needed to run. But the way he was organising things, keeping everything locked and separate, made me nervous. At 2 in the morning, Melvin's phone lit up with a notification. He had left it charging in the kitchen, so I walked over to look. It was a screenshot from Claire's Instagram story showing me dancing with someone at a club. The timestamp was from tonight, when I had told Melvin I was working late. The person who sent it had written, "Thought you should see this." Melvin had already read it. He had screenshotted it himself at 2:03 a.m. The rooftop bar was crowded for Claire's birthday party on Saturday night. Melvin almost didn't come because he said he wasn't feeling social, but I guilt-tripped him hard. I told him my friends would think our marriage was falling apart if he didn't show up. The irony of that statement didn't occur to me until later. He put on a nice shirt and came along, though he barely spoke during the drive downtown. Claire had reserved the entire upper section of the rooftop. There were about 30 people there. Some I knew well and others I had only met once or twice. Kieran was there as Claire's friend from the gym, which made my heart race. He looked good in his fitted black shirt, nothing like Melvin's boring business casual. When we arrived, I made sure to greet Kieran casually, like he meant nothing to me. The drinks were flowing and everyone was getting loose. Claire had insisted on doing roast-style speeches for her birthday, where everyone would say funny things about her or tell embarrassing stories. After a few rounds, she changed the rules and said we should roast each other's relationships. People laughed nervously but went along with it. The first few were harmless jokes about leaving toilet seats up or hogging blankets. When it was my turn, I stood up with my champagne glass. The alcohol in Kieran's presence made me feel bold and reckless. I started by saying Melvin was proof that size really doesn't matter when you have absolutely no expectations. The crowd laughed nervously. Some people looked uncomfortable, but others were recording on their phones. I saw at least 3 people with their cameras out. I continued, warming up to my audience. I said I deserved a humanitarian award for my charity work, for taking pity on someone from such a modest background. I put on an exaggerated version of his mother's careful way of speaking, how she pronounced every word so properly like she was trying to prove she belonged. I mentioned that Melvin thought Red Lobster was anniversary-worthy dining. People were really laughing now, though Nina Torres had stopped smiling. The worst part came when I started talking about our intimate life. I said Melvin treated sex like a race he was trying to win in record time, usually under 2 minutes. I made a joke about needing to fake it so much that I should win an Oscar. I even did a little performance of my fake moans, which got huge laughs from the drunk crowd. Kieran raised his glass to me from across the room, his eyes full of approval and something else. Melvin sat completely still through all of this. His face was like stone, showing nothing. He didn't laugh, didn't protest, didn't even look angry. He just stared at a fixed point on the wall behind me. When I finally sat down, dizzy from champagne and adrenaline, he didn't look at me. Nina Torres leaned over and whispered something to her husband. They both looked at Melvin with what seemed like sympathy and respect. Claire stood up next and made jokes about her own relationship, but they were actually funny and loving. The contrast made what I had done seem even worse. Other people gave speeches, but the energy had shifted. The party continued, but there was an undertone of discomfort. People kept glancing at Melvin, who continued to sit silently, drinking water and checking his phone occasionally. Around midnight, I went to the bathroom and Kieran followed. We kissed in the hallway by the emergency exit. He said I was incredible up there, that watching me destroy Melvin was the hottest thing he had ever seen. He said Melvin was pathetic for just sitting there and taking it. We made plans to meet Monday at the hotel. When I came back to the party, Melvin was showing something on his phone to Nina's husband. They were nodding seriously. The next morning, Melvin took Emma to the beach promenade while I slept off my hangover. When I met them there later, the effects of the previous night were obvious. A couple from the party was there with their kids. The woman saw us and immediately looked away. Her husband nodded at Melvin with what looked like respect and solidarity. Even people who hadn't been there seemed to know something had happened. Emma ran ahead on the boardwalk, chasing seagulls. She was happy to have both parents there, unaware of the tension between us. An older woman who knew Claire stopped to say hello. She mentioned hearing about the party, giving me a disapproving look. Melvin stayed quiet, watching Emma play. His calm was unnerving me more than anger would have. We stopped for ice cream and Emma asked why people were acting weird around us. She had noticed the strange looks and whispered conversations. Melvin told her that sometimes adults say things they shouldn't, and it makes other people uncomfortable. I jumped in to say that Daddy was being dramatic about a few jokes from last night. Melvin looked at me then, with something I had never seen before. It was complete detachment, like I was a stranger he was observing. His phone buzzed with another reminder. This one said, "Downtown 10:45 a.m. for Monday." He dismissed it quickly, but I saw him make a note in his small notebook. He had been carrying that notebook everywhere lately, writing things down at odd moments. When I asked what he was writing, he said he was keeping track of things. The vague answer made me more nervous than a fight would have. That evening, we were supposed to have dinner with my parents, but Melvin said he wasn't feeling up to it. This was unusual because he never missed family dinners. He said I should go with Emma, that he had some things to handle at home. When I pressed him about what things, he just said personal matters, in that new calm voice he had been using. At my parents' house, my mother asked where Melvin was. I said he wasn't feeling well. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. Emma piped up that Daddy was sleeping in the guest room because of snoring. My mother's eyebrows went up, but she didn't comment. My father asked if everything was all right. I said everything was perfect, but the word felt like ash in my mouth. When we got home, Melvin was in the living room with his laptop. He had several browser tabs open, but minimized them when we walked in. His notebook was filled with dates and times in neat handwriting. He had printed something out but put the papers in a folder before I could see what they were. The folder went into the locked desk drawer with the others. That night, Melvin's mother called during dinner. Her voice on speaker was cold and formal. She said someone had forwarded her a video from the rooftop party. The room went silent except for the sound of Emma's fork against her plate. Patricia said we needed to have a family conversation soon. Melvin said he would arrange it. After he hung up, Emma asked if Grandma was mad at us. Melvin said no, just concerned about grown-up stuff. I tried to do damage control by texting Patricia that it was all jokes, that people were taking things too seriously. She didn't respond. I texted Robert too, but his response was just, "We'll talk in person." The weight of what I had done was starting to press down on me, but I told myself they would get over it. Everyone always got over everything eventually. Before bed, I heard Melvin on another quiet phone call. He was saying something about documentation and timeline. He mentioned specific dates and times that matched the notes in his notebook. When he saw me listening, he took the call outside to the garage. I could see him pacing through the window, gesturing as he talked. The call lasted 45 minutes. When he came back in, I asked who he was talking to so late. He said he was handling some things that needed attention. I said he was being mysterious and weird. He looked at me directly and said that he was being organized and careful. The way he said careful felt like a warning. He went to the guest room and I heard the lock click behind him. Patricia's voice on the phone had been ice cold when she called Monday morning. She said we needed to come over immediately for a family discussion. The drive to Melvin's parents' house was silent except for Emma asking if she could play in Grandpa's garage. We dropped her at school first, both of us knowing this conversation wasn't for her ears. The small house looked the same as always, with Patricia's garden perfectly maintained and Robert's truck in the driveway. But when we walked in, the atmosphere was different. Both his parents sat across from us at their dining table like judges at a trial. Robert's hands were shaking slightly as he held his coffee mug. Patricia had her phone on the table between us like evidence. Patricia played the video from the rooftop party without warning. My voice filled their small living room, mocking their home, their clothes, their way of speaking. I heard myself imitating Patricia's careful grammar, saying she tried too hard to sound educated. The video showed me gesturing at their family photos on the wall behind me at the party, calling them poor people's attempt at looking classy. Robert stood up abruptly and went to the garage. We could hear him moving tools around, metal clanging against metal. It was how he dealt with emotional pain, Melvin had told me once. Patricia's eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. She asked how I could say such cruel things about people who had welcomed me as a daughter. She said they had given us money when we were starting out, had watched Emma countless times, had never asked for anything except respect. I tried to explain that it was taken out of context, that friends understood it was just fun. Patricia actually laughed, but it was bitter. She said she had heard from 3 different people about what I had been saying for months. The size jokes about Melvin, calling their family embarrassing, saying I only married him out of pity. She asked point blank if I was having an affair. I said that was ridiculous, that she was letting gossip poison her mind against me. Melvin sat silent beside me, not defending me but not attacking either. His silence was almost worse than anger would have been. Patricia looked at her son with such sadness. She asked him what he was going to do about this situation. Melvin finally spoke, saying he would handle things properly and legally. The way he emphasized legally made my stomach drop. Robert came back from the garage with oil still on his hands. He looked at me like I was a stranger. He said in all his years as a mechanic, dealing with all kinds of people, he had never encountered someone so deliberately cruel. He said he had worked with his hands his whole life to give Melvin opportunities, and if I thought that was embarrassing, then I was the one who should be ashamed. The conversation ended with Patricia saying she needed space from me. She would still see Emma but didn't want me in her home until I could show genuine remorse. Robert added that he had already told his extended family about my comments. The cousins, aunts, and uncles who had welcomed me at our wedding now knew exactly what I thought of them. The betrayal in his voice was devastating. The drive home was suffocating. Melvin didn't say a word, but I could feel his rage radiating off him. When I tried to explain that his parents were overreacting, he actually pulled over. He turned to me and said very calmly that I had humiliated the 2 people who loved him most. He said I had mocked their whole lives for entertainment. Then he started driving again without waiting for my response. Emma's birthday party was that Saturday at the community centre. We had rented the space months ago and invited her whole class plus family friends. The morning of the party, Melvin loaded his car with decorations while I picked up the cake. We arrived separately, which several parents noticed. The whispers started immediately when people saw we weren't wearing our wedding rings. During setup, other parents kept their distance from me. Nina Torres was there with her daughter and she barely acknowledged me. Her husband helped Melvin hang streamers and they talked quietly in the corner. I heard Melvin mention something about documentation and saw him show something on his phone. Nina's husband nodded and patted Melvin's shoulder supportively. The party started and Emma was having fun, not noticing the tension. But during cake time, she asked the question I had been dreading. In front of everyone, she asked loudly why Daddy was sleeping in the guest room now. The room went quiet. Parents looked at each other uncomfortably. I laughed it off, saying Daddy snored too loud sometimes. But Emma, being 6 and persistent, said he had been in there for weeks. Another parent, trying to change the subject, mentioned seeing me at the downtown hotel last week. She asked if I was planning an event there. That hotel was where Kieran and I met every Tuesday and Thursday. I felt my face get hot as I said yes. I was considering it for a work function. Melvin was across the room, organising presents into neat piles with his usual methodical precision. His phone buzzed with a reminder that said, "Meeting personal," and he stepped out to the parking lot. Through the window I could see him on the phone, taking notes in that notebook he carried everywhere. When he came back, his face was completely neutral, but something had shifted. He started cleaning up even though the party wasn't over, putting leftover food in containers and stacking chairs. After the party, Nina Torres approached Melvin while I was loading the car. She pulled out her phone and showed him something that made his jaw clench. She was scrolling through what looked like a group chat. I saw her point to specific messages, and Melvin took photos of her screen with his phone. When Nina saw me watching, she gave me a look of pure disgust. That evening, Emma asked if we were getting divorced. The question hit like cold water. She said kids at school were saying their parents had heard things. Melvin knelt down and told her that Mommy and Daddy were working through some problems, but we both loved her more than anything. The way he phrased it, working through instead of working out, felt deliberate. I found Melvin later in the living room, organizing papers into a binder. There were printed screenshots of social media posts, text messages with dates and times highlighted, and what looked like a timeline of events. When I demanded to know what he was doing, he said he was being thorough. I accused him of trying to intimidate me. He said he was just protecting himself and Emma. The next few days were a cold war in our house. Melvin moved his important documents to a locked filing cabinet. He changed his phone password and laptop login. He opened a separate bank account, which I only found out when mail arrived from a different bank. When I confronted him about it, he said it was for financial clarity going forward. Every word felt like a step towards something final. My mother called to say she had heard about the birthday party incident. News travelled fast in our social circle. She asked what was really going on. I tried to explain that Melvin was being dramatic, that he was punishing me for a few jokes. She said it sounded like more than jokes if his parents had cut contact with me. The disappointment in her voice was hard to hear. At work, my manager pulled me aside for a conversation. She said there had been concerns about my professional image based on some social media content. Apparently, someone had sent screenshots of Claire's posts and my comments to HR. They weren't taking action yet, but wanted me to be aware that personal conduct could affect professional standing. The walls were closing in from every direction. That night, I heard Melvin on another long phone call. He was in the garage with the door closed, but I could hear him through the window. He was saying something about evidence and proper procedures. He mentioned specific dates that aligned with when I had been with Kieran. When he came back inside, I asked who he was talking to. He said he was handling necessary matters and would proceed properly. I found Melvin on the living room sofa Sunday evening with his laptop and several folders spread across the coffee table. The folders were labelled social media, witnesses, timeline, and financial records. He was adding printed screenshots to clear plastic sleeve protectors, each one carefully dated and labelled. When I walked in, he didn't try to hide anything. He just kept working methodically. The screenshots were devastating in their thoroughness. He had everything from Claire's Instagram posts to the group chat Nina had shown him. There were comments from people I didn't even know had seen my stories. He had multiple angles of video from the rooftop party, my whole speech transcribed with timestamps. The hotel charges were highlighted in yellow on our credit card statements, matching dates with my supposed gym sessions. I tried to laugh it off, saying he was being psychotic by keeping records of jokes. He didn't look up from his sorting. He just said he was being organised about documenting facts. I told him this was harassment, that he was trying to scare me. He finally looked at me then and said he wasn't trying to scare anyone. He was just handling things properly and legally. My hands were shaking as I went to the parking garage to call Kieran. I told him Melvin was building some kind of case, that he had evidence of everything. Kieran laughed and said Melvin was too weak to actually do anything, but something in my stomach felt tight and wrong. This wasn't the passive Melvin I had married. This was someone else, someone who had been pushed too far. When I came back up, Melvin was on the phone with someone, making notes in one of his folders. His voice was professional and clear. He ended the call when I walked in. He said he had appointments tomorrow that couldn't be moved. When I asked what kind of appointments, he just said personal matters that required attention. He picked up all his folders and locked them in the desk drawer. Before going to the guest room, he turned to me and said he would handle everything properly and legally. He said Emma would be protected, that he had made sure of that. The way he said it, so calm and final, made my hands shake. He closed the guest room door and I heard the lock click. The conference room at my law firm had glass walls so my clients could see everything. The process server was professional, confirming my name before handing me the packet. My hands shook as I opened it. Civil complaint for defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Melvin was the plaintiff. Every single rumour I had spread was documented with dates, witnesses, and screenshot exhibits. The damages section included lost professional opportunities, therapy costs, and Emma's counselling. Court date, January 15th, 9 a.m. My client stared through the glass as my career imploded.